It's almost like you've been teammates your entire life. That's artificial intimacy. The couple has never really pursued each other. They never really decided to become one. A good marriage isn't something you find, it's something you make. Hi, I'm Gary Thomas. I'm an author, a teaching pastor, a husband of almost 39 years now, father of 3, a grandfather, and an ardent fan of Focus on the Family. And hey, I'm here to answer some of the most frequent questions that I get. First question is this: what does my wife want even more than to be loved? And I would say it all comes under the word cherish. Cherish is a special aspect of marriage that God challenged me with some years ago that many of us promised on the day we got married. I promised to love and to cherish until death do us part. It's probably the last time I ever thought about the word cherish. But when I began to understand what it means to focus on the excellence of my wife, to cultivate attitudes and a heart that delights in her, who she is, her spiritual maturity, the beauty of her as a person, it completely changed the climate of our marriage. I'll always be a fan of love, but love often focuses us on our obligations, duty, loyalty, commitment hanging in there. When you can turn the corner into what does it mean to cherish your spouse, and this goes for husbands as well as wives, I believe it creates an entirely different dynamic in marriage. How do I love my spouse better? I could talk on this for a weekend, but let me just suggest one practical step that I found is very helpful. Slow and steady beats big and sweaty. Often if we know we've been neglecting our spouse, we want to have some grand gesture, some blowout gift, some blowout evening or one date night to try to make up for it all. But often if we've been ignoring the day-to-day call to love and cherish our spouse, one big event just reminds them of what they've missed. I think of a good friend of mine, Kevin Harney. He's a pastor out in California, and he was at a Promise Keepers conference, and they told men that they wanted them to think of something to do that would really bless their wives when they got home. And one thought about installing a computer program, another one washing and detailing his wife's car. Kevin sat before the Lord and asked him, Lord, what does Sherry hate doing more than anything in the world? And it was easy for him to think of that. She hates making the bed. And so he made a decision for the rest of his life. He would be the one to make the bed, and he would pray for his wife while he did so. And he's now done it probably over 4,000 or 5,000 times. And he even makes his bed in the hotel room because he misses the opportunity to pray for his wife while he does it. And I think if most of us would just think of 1 or 2 things we could do to take off our spouse's plate on a regular basis that they just don't like to do. My wife hates to fill up the gas tank. That's become my job, to make sure she never has to fill up her car. Little things like that can be a great expression of our love, expressions of kindness, and expressions that we are willing to go out of our way to bless you. So just remember, slow and steady often beats big and sweaty when it comes to loving and cherishing our spouse. How about this? Is it okay to feel pleasure as a Christian? Not only do I think pleasure is okay, I believe it's essential for us to live lives as worshipers of God, to live lives as a relationship, and to live lives as healthy individuals. It says something profound about God. He created us in such a way that we can experience pleasure in so many different dimensions, whether it's the pleasure of sight, looking at a beautiful mountaintop, whether it's the pleasure of sound. Early in my career, I got to work on a couple books with Michael W. Smith, and we were in his vehicle, and he put in a CD of a record that he was working on, and he had a great sound system, and hearing all of the melodies and the bass through a perfect sound system. I mean, I heard music like I'd never heard it before. Well, God created music with bass and melodies. He created the sense of percussion and wind instruments, and he gave us ears and a brain that are able to comprehend them and receive them. Those are gifts from God that should lead us to worship him and thank him. Because I believe it's when we live a life of pure pleasure that we're led to worship God more for giving us those pure pleasures. And as an added bonus, we're not as tempted by the impure pleasures that bring momentary pleasure, but long-term regret. I believe pleasure is a part of a healthy, mature, and sacred life. All right, here's a tricky one. Does he love sex more than me? Okay, obviously, I don't know the person that wrote this and asked this, and I don't know her husband, so I can't give a definitive answer. It's a tricky question, but it is why I address this in my book, Cherish, where I say the thing I love about making Cherish the new paradigm in my marriage is that I can use sex to cherish my wife instead of using my wife to cherish sex. So in saying that, yeah, I do think it's possible that a husband could selfishly use his wife because that's the place where he can enjoy sex. And no wife wants to be used. It is monstrous to use a wife that way. But when I look at the sexual relationship through the lens of cherishing, then sex becomes a tool whereby I can give her pleasure, I can express her worth, her desirability. I can show that her welfare is important to me, that I value her, that I treasure her, that I cherish her. But let me also look at some of the motivations behind this, because I don't think it's just sex that we should ask this about. I mean, I could look at the wife and say, first, if your husband is loving sex more than you, he needs counseling. That needs to stop. No woman should feel used like that. It is a dead-end road. It becomes an abusive road sooner rather than later. But let's look at this from a wider angle. Do you love long walks and talks more than your husband? Romantic vacations. I had one husband who said, I think my wife just wanted me because she wanted a family. And so she needed a father for her children and someone who was willing to provide the paychecks for them. These are questions where we just have to search our own hearts. And instead of pitting ourselves against each other, for me as a man, I look at Ephesians 5:25, where I'm called to love my wife as Christ loved the church, who gave himself up for her. That means loving my wife as Christ loved the church. It should cost me something. I got married to be loved. I loved movies before I got married. I listened to a lot of pop music. I would read novels. And the theme and the point for virtually everyone was you need somebody to complete you. You need somebody to love you. That was my motivation. But I believe God challenged me one time to say, Gary, your greatest need isn't to be loved, because I've loved you like no one else can love you. I've given you my son for the forgiveness of the sins. I've given you my Holy Spirit to comfort you, to counsel you. I've given you my own Father's affirmation. So once we receive that, our greatest need isn't to be loved, it's to learn how to love. There are dozens of passages in Scripture that talk about the need to grow in love, to love even our enemies, to have an increasing love. And so I believe my focus in marriage should be, how can I learn to love like I've never loved before? Love as Christ does, which means I want my wife's ultimate benefit to be the focus of my concern. How can I help her be who God created her to be? Supporting her in whatever ministry God has given her. Helping her dreams come true. Just trying to make her life more pleasant and fun. That should be my focus. And here's what I've found. When I'm focused more on loving rather than whether I'm being loved, I'm actually happier and more content. I can control whether I'm loving. I can't control whether I'm being loved. So I hope that both husband and wife would go into marriage and say, you know what? I might have got married for a lot of selfish motivations. Maybe I really did just get married because I thought, man, I want to have sex a lot without guilt, and this woman is agreeing to marry me. Or maybe I did get married because I just wanted a guy who would be there for me, or who would help provide for the family income, or would help me have a family. Whatever our motivations were to get married, which is often to be loved, let's take on the biblical commandment to focus on learning how to love, because I believe that's a large part of what God designed marriage to do, to teach us how to love even as Christ loved the church. Here's another question that I'm sure might surprise people because they're thinking of something entirely different. What is AI in marriage. I wrote about this in a book, A Lifelong Love, and in a blog. Most people today, they hear AI as artificial intelligence. I want to talk about artificial intimacy. It's the foundation of more marriages than we'd like to admit. What happens is a couple becomes infatuated with each other, and intimacy just feels real and strong because the things going on in our brain just make us feel like we're connected. We want to resolve conflict. We touch, we affirm each other. We do all of the things that you have to do to make intimacy grow. But we know from neuroscience that infatuation has a shelf life of about 12 to 18 months. But it's often enough to get a couple to a point of becoming engaged. Okay, now the infatuation might be fading, but they have the intimacy of planning a wedding. You've got to make a lot of decisions. I've seen couples go through 9 months making the decision of where they're gonna get married, who's gonna do the marriage, what are they gonna have, what kind of a ceremony, what kind of flowers, who's gonna be in the wedding thing and that. So then they get married, they come back from their honeymoon, and now they have the task of setting up a home. Where are they gonna live? Are they gonna rent an apartment? Are they gonna buy a house? How do they set up the house? They're in a new neighborhood. They're starting their jobs. All of these are tasks that create a certain kind of intimacy. They give you something to talk about. What are we gonna do? What's gonna happen and whatnot? And then when that starts to fade down, you're settled and you've got it. Often couples will then start to have children. That gives you a lot to talk about. What are we gonna name the child? How do we set up the nursery? Now the child is born. How are we gonna take care of the child? How are we gonna train the child? All of that. And you can see how so much of modern relationships are just based on these tasks. Experience an infatuation, get married, and actually I could throw sexual chemistry in there too. Early on, when sex becomes a part of the relationship, things are going on in your brain where that creates a certain kind of intimacy. Setting up a household creates an intimacy. Raising children creates an intimacy. But it's not a real intimacy. It's more tasks that are being done. More than your husband and wife, more than you're one together, it's almost like you've been teammates your entire life. You shared an infatuation. You shared a wedding ceremony. You shared setting up a house. You shared raising kids. And now the kids are gone, and what happens? Well, what do teammates do when the season is over? They go their own ways. And we see that a lot with gray divorce. Once they've gone through all of these tasks of life, and there doesn't seem to be another task, they don't feel like they've had anything to share. And so that's artificial intimacy. The couple has never really pursued each other. They never really decided to become one. It's why I have stressed throughout my career, talking about marriage, that a good marriage isn't something you find. It's something you make, and it takes a long time to make. I choose to be interested in my wife, to find out what concerns her, what makes her passionate about life, what her fears are, what her hurts were. And you might say, well, we've been through all that, but no, it changes. When a woman gets married, it changes her. When she has children or isn't able to have children, it changes her. When she loses her parents or gets the job of her dreams or loses the job of her dreams or goes through a serious illness or watches her last child move away and becomes an empty nester, all of those are stages of life that shape the person we're married to. And genuine intimacy is being a part of that, being engaged, growing together, understanding each other, enjoying each other, growing in our love and appreciation for each other. So sharing tasks builds a certain kind of intimacy, but it's a task-oriented intimacy, and that's where too many couples go astray. And so to build genuine intimacy rather than artificial intimacy, I believe it's important to build a spiritual foundation together, a couple that's praying together, discussing scriptures together, going to church together, serving God together. That brings a real sense of intimacy. Taking time to know what's going on with your spouse. What is your spouse's biggest temptation right now? What is your spouse's biggest fear? What is a dream they have that maybe because they had to put it on the side for the sake of marriage or family, they haven't fulfilled it, and you can bring it up to the forefront and say, how do we get this done together? You know what? The most intimate marriages I know are that where the husband or wife have gone to the other and said, you've been so faithful as a husband, as a wife, as a father, as a mother. But now this is a season where I really want to help your dreams come true. It gives excitement to the couple. It gives a new sense of intimacy because you appreciate your spouse for who they are, not just for what they do. And I really think that's the basic difference between artificial intimacy and genuine intimacy. Hey, if you've enjoyed all of these discussions, you can find out more on my website, which is GaryThomas.com. GaryThomas.com. I have links to my Substack blog and social media. You could also, and I really hope you'll do this, check out more of Focus on the Family's incredible offerings. There's a link right below where you could subscribe and not miss out on all of the brilliant women and men that they bring out to help us grow in our faith and in our family. And I hope you'll check it out.